A former nurse has been charged with 8 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder following an investigation into baby deaths at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
The following stories tell the tale of 3 psychotic killers that were still taking people's lives a few years ago. This case takes us all the way back to 1993 in Glenview, Illinois. It was a peaceful Cook County village where teens would hang out with their neighbors outside their homes. The crime rates were very low, and parents were happy to let their kids go out freely. But on August 14th, 1993, one man walked out into his front yard when he saw his daughter's body laying in a pool of blood in the bushes.
I was the one who found her. I woke up and I had a cup of coffee and I was going out to my van. And I just happened to see 2 little tennis shoes sticking up by the side door. And when I saw it was her, I dropped the coffee cup.
It was 18-year-old Trisha Paciaccio. She was a fun, loving high school girl who was kind to everyone and had no enemies. No one understood why anyone would do such a horrible thing to her. She had been multiple times in a very violent way.
I was the first responder to the scene back on 1993. I walked to the south side of the home, and that's where I saw the victim lying on the ground near the garage. She had a lot of blood on her shirt or her blouse. At that time, I was guessing she was numerous times.
The police knew they were looking for a psychotic killer who was capable of very violent outbursts. No one was known to behave like that in Trisha's close circle, but the investigators rounded up about 15 suspects, all people who Trisha or her family knew at the time. One of them was Michael Gargiulo, a friend of Trisha's brother, Doug. As soon as the police started asking him questions, he began acting strangely.
Mike Gargiulo is a very powerful young man, and he flat refused to cooperate with the police. The state's attorney's office, they wanted more than we had at that time.
The police couldn't arrest Michael as they didn't have enough evidence, but he kept sending out red flags. The first one to notice them was Scott, Mike's childhood friend. He says that Mike always had 2 sides. One is the shy, awkward teen.
The other side of Mike was he had what I call a crazy switch, where if he really wanted something, and he was going to get it one way or another, and he flipped a switch. All emotions, gone.
But he rarely showed this to anyone in his circle, Trisha's family included. Mike would often come to their house to hang out with Doug and their other friends. Trisha's parents only saw the quiet guy in the background.
I knew him to be very quiet, one of the guys that were in the back. He was never loud or boisterous whatsoever.
Mike, Doug, and Scott had actually driven Trisha home 2 days before Mike stabbed her to death. Absolutely no one suspected him for it. Until about a year later, when he started making grand gestures for Trisha's family.
First started with a flower.
He brought Diane flowers.
I'm like, why is Michael bringing us? It was live greenery. At Easter time, he brought us a lily. He brought us a dinner certificate to a restaurant, and then he even brought him a shirt.
According to criminal psychologists, murderers sometimes do this to try and atone for their deeds.
One of the psychologists that was talking to us says he's trying to expiate his sin. He's trying to atone for his crime with the presents that he was giving to family.
But the more Mike gave to the Paciaccios, the more attention he drew to himself. Soon enough, the police were on his tail. For the next few years, the Illinois police tried to get enough evidence to arrest Mike, and Mike tried to dodge them. One of his methods was redirecting the police's attention onto his friends, including Doug, Trisha's brother.
And he looked at me and he said, if you knew who did this, would you kill them or could you kill them? I said, well, what do you think? Ask any father, any brother, anybody. I think you know the answer. The police called me later on, Detective Jack Reed, and said, do you realize that Michael Gargiulo called us and told us that you threatened him?
Mike even tried to frame his friend Eric for the crime.
He attempted at that time to lay all the suspicion on his doorstep by telling us that the morning after the murder, Eric came to his home and asked him to come along so he could hide something, a gym bag. We asked Mike Gargiulo what was inside the bag. I have no idea.
But once the police figured out Eric was innocent, Mike came into the spotlight again. Finally, in 1998, he fled to Los Angeles. Unfortunately, this was no clean slate for him. His crimes would only get more and more gruesome. In 2001, Mike set his eyes on Ashley Ellerin. She was a 22-year-old fashion design student from a tiny Northern California town. She had come to LA to study and make it big on the Hollywood scene.
she like to have fun?
Absolutely. We like to have fun. We had a lot of fun.
Ashley and her friends would often get together late at night and party at LA's hottest clubs. In February 2001, Ashley caught the eye of 23-year-old Ashton Kutcher. He was one of Hollywood's young and promising actors at the time, and Ashley quickly recognized him, and they started talking. Before long, Ashton asked her out.
We had hung out with him a couple of times. They had, maybe gone out on a couple dates or whatever.
On February 21st, at around 10:45 p.m., Ashton drove to Ashley's home to pick her up and take her to the Grammys party. But Ashley wouldn't answer the door. Ashton waited for a bit, then drove off. Before he left, he took a brief look through the window and saw what he thought was spilled wine on the floor. Tragically, it wasn't wine. Ashton didn't think much of it at that time, but soon enough, Ashley's roommate found her dead body lying in a pool of...
I entered the house. There was 2 steps to the left here, and Ashley was laying across the 2 stairs, absolutely blue and covered in...
She'd been stabbed 47 times, even worse than Trisha. One of the stabs in the neck almost severed her head. Another stab wound to the head went into her skull, taking out a chunk of her skull. It was the worst the LA police detectives had ever seen.
A lot of anger, a lot of rage. Somebody had isolated Ashley Ellerin to kill her and was very, very angry when he did it. It just was a very bad scene. Probably one of the worst I've seen.
But just like in Illinois, Mike left no evidence behind. The only clue was a strange story from a few months prior to the murder. Mike had rang Ashley's doorbell and introduced himself as a heating and air guy, a repairman. He did end up repairing Ashley and her friend's heater and spooked them out with strange stories about how he's a professional boxer. Mike had been an amateur boxer and now was working as a repairman in LA with dreams of making it in the big scene as an actor.
Your name?
Mike Gargiulo.
During the early 2000s, he appeared as a boxer in someone's short dissertation film. With no clues to follow, Ashley's case, just like Trisha's, went cold. But in 2005, the LA police were notified of yet another dead body, matching the killer's type, young, attractive women. 32-year-old Maria Bruno was found dead at her El Monte apartment, just a few doors away from Mike's apartment.
This is a building where the murder happened. Behind me in apartment number 20 is where Maria Bruno lived.
So he kind of has a pretty clear shot if he's looking through the window right down to her place.
He has a very clear shot at her front door and both living room window and the kitchen window.
Maria was a mother of 4 from El Salvador. She had recently separated from her husband, who had taken custody of their children. On December 1st, 2005, Mike squeezed into her flat through her window and stabbed her 17 times while she was sleeping.
After she was dead, her body was somewhat mutilated, and you just, that's crap you see in the movies. In real life, that is very rare. It just doesn't happen.
Once again, he left no relevant clues at the scene, but the police started connecting the victims. They were 3 young and defenseless women who were attacked in their homes. While the police were desperately looking for suspects, Mike was planning to kill again, but this time, his plan would fail dramatically. On April 28, 2008, just before midnight, Mike entered the home of his neighbor, Michelle Murphy.
Proceeds into the bedroom where she's sleeping, and what awakes her is a knife being plunged into her.
Michelle was stabbed several times in her chest, shoulder, and right arm before she managed to grab Mike's knife and throw it away. Michelle kicked him in the chest with her feet, and that's when he fled the scene.
Did he say anything to her ever?
I'm sorry.
He said, "I'm sorry."
I'm sorry.
This time, Mike left his blood at the scene. 3 weeks after the stabbing, a DNA sample came back from the lab, and the police finally had their killer. 24 hours later, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder. In the next few months, Detective Richard Lewis and his team connected Mike to all of his murders: Trisha, Ashley, and Maria. From the very first time he got arrested, Mike asked Richard, "Which agency is this?"
That tells me a lot. It tells me that he wasn't sure of which crime he's getting charged for.
The DNA sample now helped connect the 3 LA cases, but in Trisha's case, there was something else.
While watching that episode of 48 Hours, a viewer who years earlier had worked with Michael Gargiulo in a Los Angeles nightclub remembered that Gargiulo had once bragged to him and others that he had killed a young woman in Chicago.
Finally, On July 7, 2011, he was charged with Trisha's murder. His trials for the other murders were delayed over and over again, but in 2019 he was convicted on all counts, with Ashton Kutcher testifying against him. In 2021, he was sentenced to death. Our last story begins way down south in Louisiana, and it's the most gruesome one yet. Ronald Dominique was born on January 9, 1964, in this quiet 15,000 people place. He lived with his parents and older sister in a trailer park on the outskirts of the city. Ronald grew up in poverty, and he'd always had a weight problem. At school, he would often be bullied as a result of this. His colleagues described him as melancholic, quiet, and suffering from low self-esteem. Shortly before leaving school, Ronald also discovered he was gay, and he started visiting a local gay bar, sometimes singing as a drag queen. Soon enough, he started getting bullied by his former classmates again.
To some degree, Dominique was in a trap. He was stuck with his sexuality, but this was also attracting ridicule from others. There was very little he could do about this, and his struggle to exist under this kind of dominance by others probably made him very frustrated and angry.
Ronald Dominique had an unhappy youth, but what he did next is shocking and unacceptable, even in his case. On August 25, 1996, a young man jumped out of the window from Ronald's place, shouting to the neighbors that he had been. Dominique had tried to kill him too. Dominique was immediately arrested, but when the case was transferred to the court, the prosecutor's office was unable to locate or identify the victim, and the case was dropped. In July of 1997, the body of 19-year-old David Mitchell was found in the Louisiana canals.
The young black male was found in a canal, a shallow canal, and the coroner ruled his death partially by asphyxia, by drowning.
The police were suspicious of David drowning in such shallow waters, but they didn't have any evidence of foul play. However, over the next few years, the bodies would keep showing up. They were usually African American men between 16 and 46 years old. The police were clueless. Were these drug hits? Unfortunately, Dominique would target drug addicts and people with a history of drug trafficking or possession.
We felt as though the suspect was targeting vulnerable people, people that didn't have families to go home to, people that just would take a ride from anybody.
He would lure them to his trailer with promises of drugs or a sex party involving his alleged girlfriend. Then he would rape them and strangle them to death. Ronald Dominique killed 23 men in under 10 years. All of them were in the Yuma region, and most of them were thrown into the bayou. Soon enough, people all around Louisiana were aware and afraid of the Bayou Strangler. He continued to baffle the police while they were desperately trying to find a connection between the victims and a motive for the killings.
All of these men were, for all intents and purposes, healthy, fit, young. We knew that whoever was killing them had to be stronger than them to be able to overpower them.
The police had the victim profile, but the killer remained a mystery for 9 years. In November 2006, Dominique tried to strike again. He stopped his van as he saw a man walking along the road. He showed him a picture of a girl and made him a proposition.
He said, you see this girl right here? That's my girlfriend. Look, when she was a kid, she was raped. So she's very scared to have sex, but I think she'd want to have sex with you.
Somehow, he convinced this man, Ricky Wallace, to come to his trailer. There, Dominique wanted to convince him to try bondage, but Ricky refused and left quickly. Ricky reported this creepy event, and the police arrested Dominique and asked him for a blood sample. The domino pieces started falling. His DNA matched the profile found on several of his victims. On December 1st, 2006, after a decade of horrifying crimes, he was finally arrested at a homeless shelter. He'd moved out of his sister's place because he knew his arrest was imminent, and he didn't want to trouble her. Once at the police station, Dominique confessed to all his 23 murders, describing all of their gruesome details to the officers. Even so, he maintained he was innocent. According to him, the victims' addictions and poverty, they voluntarily agreed to be tied and treated badly for money. Dominique received several life sentences in the Louisiana State Penitentiary without the possibility for parole. While this huge list of victims left the police and the community shocked and scared, the case being solved also made them more confident that there is hope for the vulnerable. No one should be scared for their lives. Some serial killers look like psychos straight from horror movies, but some conceal their thoughts and actions behind an innocent-looking face. Lucy Letby was born in 1990 in Herefordshire, UK. She grew up with her parents, Susan and David, as their only child. She attended a comprehensive school in the area, then went on to get her pediatric nursing degree in 2011. From the outside, nothing seems wrong about Lucy or her family. Susan and David are still together, and they all lived in the same house for over 25 years. One of Lucy's neighbors said, "I've seen her grow up. She seemed like a lovely woman." So this news is deeply and utterly shocking. I can't fathom it. When you hear of sorts of things, you always get one or two people saying, "I thought there was something fishy about them." But with Lucy, all you will hear is positive things. Indeed, nothing on Lucy's social media and none of her friends and acquaintances know anything that could act as a sign for what she was about to do. Moreover, Lucy led a classic social life, and her work colleagues, the other nurses and midwives at the Countess of Chester Hospital, described her as an exemplary, hard-working woman. Lucy started working at the Chester Hospital in 2013. Quickly, she became the face of a fundraising initiative called Baby Grow. The hospital wanted to raise £3 million for a new neonatal unit, and Lucy was the perfect employee to show in the papers. Or at least that's what the hospital thought. The caption under her picture said, "My role involves caring for a wide range of babies, requiring various levels of support. Some are here for a few days, others for many months, and I enjoy seeing them progress and supporting their families." But something was off. In 2013, there were 2 infant deaths at the hospital. In 2015, there were 8 deaths. Not only was this an abnormal number of unexplainable deaths, the cause raised some questions too. The premature babies had collapsed with heart and lung failure, but were unusually impossible to resuscitate. Even more concerningly, the babies developed strange blotches on their arms and legs after the futile resuscitation attempts. At least one of the babies developed these blotches on the chest and abdomen as well. So what was happening? Throughout 2016, the hospital's doctors took a high-level thematic review of the cases, but nothing made any sense to them. The more doctors looked into it, the further away they felt from an answer. And while they were investigating the previous cases, 5 more babies died under just as mysterious circumstances. So in 2017, the police were called in to investigate. Meanwhile, the Chester Hospital doctor decided to downgrade the neonatal unit from level 2 to level 1. This means they would no longer accept very premature babies born less than 32 weeks old, or babies who needed intensive care. The hospital was afraid that this was what was ruining their numbers, but the truth was a much darker one. In July 3rd, 2018, over 2 years after the hospital started the inquiry into the cases, the police made a breakthrough. They arrested 28-year-old Lucy Letby for the murder of 8 babies and the attempted murder of 6 others. But about 72 hours later, she was released on bail. The police simply didn't have enough evidence to keep her in custody. The police found nothing at her home either. Yes, the babies died during Lucy's shift, but their heart and lung failure couldn't be connected to a clear cause. It is still unclear what Lucy's method or other methods were. But the police didn't give up. Throughout the next year, they probed another 17 infant deaths. Lucy was arrested again in 2019 and was again discharged following insufficient evidence. But in November 2020, Lucy was arrested for the 3rd time.
A former nurse has been charged with 8 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder following an investigation into baby deaths at the Countess of Chester Hospital. 30-year-old Lucy Letby has been rearrested as part of an investigation which began in 2017.
The mounting evidence is still unclear to the public, but it is enough to keep Lucy in jail while she awaits trial.
Cheshire Police say that their investigation has taken so long because it's been highly complex and extremely challenging, and they say that they've consulted a number of medical specialists to ensure that it's been as thorough as possible.
The news shocked her family, her friends, and of course, all of the grieving babies' families. How could a young, apparently caring nurse who once raised funding for the hospital destroy so many lives? How could anyone take the life of a newborn baby who needs medical support? As of March 2022, Lucy awaits trial for her gruesome deeds. So far, she has pleaded not guilty, but the police are confident she won't walk free again. What do you think about these cases? Let me know in the comment section, and before you go, make sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more.